You might know this already, but I've got an odd relationship with Daedalic Entertainment. In terms of games I've reviewed and liked, they're 1 for 3 so far. Deponia was mechanically solid, but starred a toxic sponge instead of a main character I wanted to play as. The Whispered World was an enjoyable, whimsical affair, albeit with a slightly disappointing ending. And A New Beginning suffered the most poorly directed voice acting out of any game I've ever covered on this channel. Let's see if we can tip the balance here with Anna's Quest, a fable-driven black comedy game which, if I hadn't read that description, I would have assumed was more or less a kid's title. Out of these 4, Anna's Quest is the most recent of the Daedalic releases, so hopefully that includes lessons learned along the way, doesn't have you play as an utter arsehole, and isn't voice acted by people speaking so slowly and carefully it's like they're trying to teach English to a tree. Let's start, as always, with the story. Once upon a time, a girl named Anna lived with her grandpa in a wee cottage in the middle of fucknose. They're isolated from the world at large, and Anna is constantly reminded of the dangers and evils and Tories and whatnot that lurk in the woods beyond their farmland. But then grandpa falls ill, forcing Anna to brave those very woods in search of a cure. Along comes a witch, she's all like, I'm having that, and locks Anna away in a tall tower. Deploying obligatory reference. Obligatory reference deployed. Contrary to folklore and the actions of other witches in the same game, this witch doesn't straight up eat Anna, but instead subjects her to an experiment using a surprisingly un-witch-like machine. Why is that? Well, to draw out Anna's natural powers of telekinesis, of course, powers the witch hopes to take for herself. Given that this telekinesis business is news to Anna entirely, and being locked up would get in the way of the whole curing her grandpa thing, Anna focuses on escaping the tower and taking her fellow inmate with her, a walking talking teddy bear. And if you think that sounded weird, the explanation behind him is almost literally a wizard did it. It makes sense in context. Anyway, point and click games are flooded with protagonists for whom physical strength and fighting prowess are very much dump stats. So I'm somewhat surprised that I haven't played many such games where a character has psychic powers. I mean, if they designed a game with that premise in mind, it could be a really good... oh, never mind. Anna's telekinesis does actually feature in the gameplay. It has its own button and everything. Look, there it is. Early chapters show her newfound powers to either be weak or difficult for her to control, with time and practice leading to more impressive displays in the later chapters. Generally, her power only gets used when there isn't an alternative. You need to be careful when adding this type of feature, I feel. Making it too powerful will have the player asking, well, why don't I use this all the time? And making it too weak will have players pondering why it's there in the first place. Functionally, it's pretty much another inventory item, albeit one you can use on other inventory items, and they've struck a good balance between useful and OP, with the gradual increase in skill contributing to that. As for the rest of the interface, it's 2-button, left click to do, right click to look. It does mean that there's only one action per object, a downside I've neglected to mention when discussing 2-button interfaces previously, but personally I like the streamlining. Speaking of, we have the inventory on the mouse wheel, same as in Deponia. Scroll down to show inventory, scroll up to show not inventory. If you're on a trackpad or you can't use the mouse wheel for religious reasons or something, you can press the I key instead. Plus there's an option to display it as an on-screen button. You can also highlight every usable object in the room with the middle mouse or the spacebar. I like this feature and I don't have many words to say on the subject. Going back to what I was saying earlier, I initially thought this would be a kids game or at least aimed at a younger audience. Streamlined interface, child protagonist, more complex puzzles made skippable, that kind of thing. Except all those features were in Deponia, and that was 3 years prior to Anna's Quest. And also not a kids game, I hope. The game's description doesn't quite bear that out, but there's certainly nothing to stop a child playing. The art style had a lot to do with that first impression, I must admit. Firm outlines and a lot of flat colours. Very simple, but it works. It suits a fantastical world seen from a child's point of view, a sheltered child at that. The occasional FMV sequence will jump in for certain story transitions. These are well done, fit with the in-game graphics, and don't feel out of place. Backgrounds were a feature the Daedalic games never had a problem with, but even the best in the business can get those wrong sometimes. Remember the scanned-in backgrounds of LeChuck's Revenge? Didn't quite work all the time, did they? Not the case for Anna's Quest though. It's nice to see Daedalic not only handle a simpler art style correctly, but have it blend so well with the characters or anything else that needs animating. Something Daedalic has a sketchier past with is voice acting, ranging from characters who provide a new benchmark in being annoying, to characters who describe an apocalypse like they're teaching nursery school kids. Anna's Quest veers far closer to good than bad, with a script that I'd describe as fairy tales with a chance of snark. The point that Anna's grandpa was trying to keep her safe from the evils of the world is hammered into you early and often, therefore the evils of the world versus Anna's kind heart could be seen as a theme of the story, to the point of wondering out loud if Anna can maintain her good nature in the face of a world that seems unfair and selfish, or indeed if Anna's causing more harm than good as she goes. If that's too deep for you, here's a witch who literally says kekeke. And then there's this line here which I can't help but feel is throwing out some shade.
Yuck. What kind of person would mess with someone's skeleton just to escape his cell.
Who indeed, Anna? Who indeed? My only real concern is that the main character could get annoying with her humble voice and excessive apologies.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm honestly really, really sorry.
It's more something I noticed than something that genuinely irked me. Does that count as my nitpick? I don't know. You better decide if she annoys you in advance though, because in stark contrast to the previous two games I've covered, this game is long. Also, I found out that the time played counter in GoG Galaxy is even worse than Steam's. I wonder if it only counts if you start the game from within the client. I'd estimate this took me around 6 to 8 hours, and I'd be lying if I'd said it was gripped the entire time. Some areas do feel a bit stretched out, but I don't know whether it's simply due to background fatigue from staying in one area too long, or merely by comparison to the shorter games I've recently covered. The village of Wunderhorn, for example, is a place you'll spend quite a lot of time in and around. Thankfully, the game presents you with 3 items to retrieve and what I suppose I'd call a side quest of mini objectives for each. Don't worry, none of them involve the collection of bear buttocks. It's a welcome contrast to the quite linear path you follow up until this point, so granting you alternatives when you're stuck on one particular puzzle chain is a great move. I'd call the initial linear part some kind of tutorial section, but it took me about 2 hours and as many chapters to reach Wunderhorn in the first place, so probably not. That said, the final chapter is a rather unique way of finishing off a story from a new perspective, but you've got a long wait for it. At least you get a good soundtrack to accompany you along the way. Sometimes it's childlike, sometimes it's fantastical, sometimes it's played by a band of cute animals, sometimes it's a remarkably epic theme for the story of a girl wandering about, but that's become a Daedalic trademark at this point. Overall, I'd say this is on the good end of the spectrum, and that brings the overall Daedalic balance back to neutral. Most of the puzzles are logical, the interface mechanics are solid, the story isn't stupid, none of the characters make me want to stuff my ears full of cookie dough. Yeah, pretty good. Depending on how much you enjoy the game, you'll either get your money's worth or it'll drag out too long, but I can't make that decision for you. You might get a satisfying experience without completing it, in which case the length is kind of a plus. In any case, the old walkthrough is there to help you. It sure as hell helped me. Anna's Quest is a solid effort that demands perhaps a little more of your time than necessary. So whether that means you dedicate an entire day to it, you only get it on sale, or you pass on it completely, that's up to you.